All right. Well, why don't we just open in a prayer and just go to the Lord and look for him for just wisdom in this time as we consider coming alongside a counselee after an orientation session. God, we look to you now for your wisdom. We thank you that you are the great physician. We thank you that you are that wonderful counselor. You know the deepest needs of our heart. You know the restoration that we need, the reconciliation with you. We thank you that you bring that hope, that living hope to us in Jesus. And so we pray that as we begin to reflect on that, we realize that the hope isn't just for eternity, but it's a hope in today. And so as we live today, may we walk with those that are facing suffering and facing aspects of how sin twists up the heart. And we ask, God, that you would use us as instruments of change in the season of life, in a person's life. So would you guide us in Jesus' name? Amen. So my name is Rick Walton, and I'm the Director of Biblical Counseling at West London Alliance Church in London, Ontario. And the counseling ministry we have is called True North Soul Care. So you may see True North Soul Care online at different times if you're part of those Facebook groups. I'm also working with Jason Kovacs. You'll see the display downstairs for the Gospel Care Collective. And we're in talks now and actually working to actually launch fully Gospel Care Collective Canada. And so that should be coming this year, so that'll be pretty exciting. So that will move us from a counseling ministry at our church that we'll maintain, and then we'll also see the counseling center that will reach and support across Canada, similar to the U.S., how the Gospel Care is reaching out across the U.S. and providing support. So we provide counseling, certification training in ABC Level 1 and 2, and also consulting. So we come alongside churches and organizations to think through how can we implement a scalable model of what that might look like in a church or within ministry. So we provide those services. I do that now with True North, and we'll continue to expand that as we look at the Gospel Care Collective Canada. So it's pretty exciting. So what I have been tasked with is saying, we've met with someone in an orientation session, and now what? Where do you go from there? So before we do so now what, I want to just touch base briefly on what are some of those things that would have been in an orientation session. So just briefly, an orientation session typically for us would help to get the counselee to think about, well, what is biblical counseling? You want to get an understanding of what they're thinking this is. Because there's a whole spectrum of ideas that people have. They might think it's a Bible study. They might think it's psychotherapy with a Christian slant. They might think that this is something that they're not really sure because they just were told that you need to go talk to Rick at True North or someone at True North. So it's really helpful that you can begin to frame up what is this thing that we call biblical counseling. And you heard a little bit of that in the main sessions, but when we're working with someone, the orientation, setting those expectations are really key. A counseling agreement, we have different points of what is it that we're actually committing to. What am I committing to you as a counselor, but what are you committing to as a counselee? That's really important. So there's different points there that we would walk through. Confidentiality is something to think through. How does that apply? And again, that would also be reflective if you're talking about a counseling ministry of your church, like True North Soul Care is. Because our confidentiality circles in also the ability to engage those that we need within our church. So if you're a member of our church and you're receiving care, we would say if we mutually agree, we would like to engage maybe the senior pastor or another church leader or a mentor that you have to walk with you outside of immediate counseling sessions as an advocate. So the circle of confidentiality could grow, but again, that wouldn't be like, surprise, guess who's in our session next week? It would be in consult together. The idea there is just that we see that the church as a community is important, and you're trying to drive that. Outside of our church, when we work with those that are outside our church, we just look to see them engaged with the local church while they're receiving care from us. The other thing is you're going to have some questions. What's the main reason why you're coming for counseling? I want to hear their perspective. What are they perceiving? What is this? What support network do they have? Who or what has been supportive? What actions have they taken? could be a whole lot or a whole lot of nothing. They could be, I'm in deep crisis right now, but I really haven't done anything about it. Well, how long have you been struggling with this? Oh, for a couple years. Okay. So that's helpful because that tells you some things where they might be at. The last thing that you would want in that orientation is really framing up hopes that they may have for this time. What are they really hoping for? That doesn't mean, again, you're going to agree 100% with everything that they say, but it helps you to get their perspective because that's where they're actually at. And if they're bang on with a good expectation or hope for this, it's realistic, then you can walk alongside that. You may need to, over time, work with them as you're talking with them to help them to reframe things up. But again, that's important. So at the end of the session, towards that orientation conclusion, you're really trying to discern a couple things, and two primary ones. Is this person in front of me in crisis or not? If they're in a moment of crisis, then what we're going to talk about next is not what you're going to shift into. You would actually shift into a whole different cycle of things to help them navigate that immediate crisis situation, to work through the emotions, find safety, stability, and support, and a variety of things. I'm thinking of Psalm 57:1, where David had escalated circumstances with Saul, where he's been chasing him. He chased him. They were on two sides of a mountain ready to battle, and then Saul had to take off and fight the Philistines again by God's providence. And now he's in a cave backed up against the wall and sees Saul in front of him. So things are escalating. He's in crisis. And this is what David said, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for in you my soul takes refuge. In the shadow of your wings, I will take refuge till the storm of destruction passes by." So he identified this was for a moment. He was anointed king, but had to go through circumstances that really didn't mirror that was happening, but he trusted God. And then he also said in that psalm, "I cry out to God Most High, to God who fulfills his purposes for me." So in the midst of those traumatic crisis moments, we're trying to come alongside folks to find their hope and their refuge under the shadow of the wings of the Almighty till the storm passes. We're trying to help them to reaffirm their hope in that God's purposes are still being fulfilled even in the midst of this difficulty. But that's if they're in the crisis, and there's a whole nother talk track for that. So now if they're not in crisis, this is where our main focus for today is. You're shifting now into really getting to know the person. And we need to slow down. We often want to race forward because you hear the counselee wanting help, and you want to provide help. But to do that well, you have to really get to know the person that's in front of you in various layers that make them them. They come to you with many things that have influenced them. Many things that have influenced them. So there's a statement that I use often. The counselee is a person to be loved, not a project to be fixed. The counselee is a person to be loved, not a project to fix. Paul Tripp talks about that we should we should love, know, speak, and do. The counselee should know that we love them, and that they should get that they actually know, we know who they are. Then we begin to speak into their life. And then we call them and exhort them to do. But there's a flow there. It's like the doctor that talks a lot, spends little time listening, makes a wrong diagnosis, and then gives you a wrong prescription of how to solve this. We don't want to be that. We don't want to be the friend that hijacks the conversation and gets the wrong understanding of what's going on, and again provides wrong solutions, and then is wondering why you're so fallen away from the Lord that you won't do what they've told you should do. We don't want to be that. So one of the things we've tried to develop, and we work with ABC as well in doing this, so in their mini practicum as well as in their level 2, they've implemented a lot of the material that, well, one of the pieces anyway, I'm going to show you in their curriculum. And it's beginning to look at a couple different life domains. It's saying, how can we look at different categories of a person's life so that we could look systematically and consistently, similarly, into people's lives? As it's not haphazard. It's not whatever carries you away in the conversation today and carries you away in the conversation tomorrow, and you think you've got a great understanding. Are there consistent buckets that you can fill up information? When I used to work in the business world, we used to talk about that when we're talking about our clients. There were different categories, and we're trying to say, do we understand this about them? What about this? What about this? Oh, we don't know this about them. Okay, well, the next conversation when we pull in, we need to make sure we get this information, because whatever solutions we're going to bring, as we bring, again, that consistent help, we want to have that kind of brand loyalty with them because we know them and they know us, and we have that kind of deep relationship. Well, even more so, I think it's true within the church. So the 4 primary life domains, one is personal life, which we're going to dig into deeply. The second is relational life. The third one is the spiritual life. And the fourth one is the vocational life. So before we get into the personal life, I want to just give you a little teaser on what those other areas are. So from the relational life, we would spend some time giving them for homework, the assessment, and they would be filling it out, and they'd come back with you, so it's thoughtfully considered by them. Around aspects of friendship. What does friendship look like? What does family look like growing up? Their siblings and mother and father, what's that relationship been? Dating or marriage, if they're single, dating, married, obviously marriage if it's marriage. And then children that could be involved. So we want to be able to take the time to just reflect on that, have them bring you up to speed on some of the story of their life. What's been going on? What has been helpful? What has been exciting? Where have they seen God work? Where have they been frustrated? Where have they been injured? Where have they learn to trust others? Where might it have been fractured? So that relational life is really important. The spiritual life. This is areas of, well, what's their experience been growing up, currently? Are they attending a church? Is it in your church? Or did they grow up in another faith and they've converted? Or we don't know. We don't know what their experiences are. We don't know why this would be such a struggle for them until we ask and allow them to share their story. Some of their beliefs is going to get distilled out. How they view God, how they view the Bible, how they view Jesus, how they view the church, there's a variety of different things. And it's not that all of these you go deeply into here. You're going to touch down on certain things that are important, but their story begins to unfold through these different categories, their relational life, their spiritual life, because that gives them shape. It helps to shape their worldview. The lenses by which they have put on and they're experiencing life by. We don't know what that is. We know what our lenses are, maybe, if we've thought it through, and we're hoping that we have a good understanding, but we're filtering it through not only our experiences and our background, but hopefully God's redemption and his transformation of the renewing of our minds and writing how we're thinking. And we're sitting before someone that's saying, I'm grieving. I'm in desperate need of help. I could be struggling with temptation and sin, and I need to learn how to break this. Well, it's really important to dig into how are they viewing some of these things as well. The vocational life. This is really, in this section here, it's looking at both education and some of the jobs, but it's not just loosely disconnected. It's trying to see if they even tether a connection to God's providential care. Do they believe that God has saved them? Yes. Do they believe that God works all things out according to his purpose? He will fulfill his purpose to me, as David said in that crisis moment. Yes. Okay, then the job that you're doing right now, where has God's hand been at that in connecting you there? So there's a pathway of education, of mentoring, of this job, and this job taught me this. But I'm seeing how God is progressively working in my life, how he's utilizing this vocational pursuit. Do they see that, or is it, again, just a disconnected thing? Is a job just money so that I can donate to the church, or that I can do what I want? Is that what the vocation is? Again, that's worldview, and that will really affect things. So if that's their view, that it's a job to get money and to give and then do what I want, then when work becomes a challenge, the coworker or the boss, what are they going to be thinking about? I need to get a different job. They're not going to be thinking about how does God work with me through those circumstances, because they don't really see the providential care of God even working through their vocation, whatever it might be. But if you see God's hand tethered to all these things as you approach your relationships, your friendships, your work, your marriage, you see God's hand in all of these things. But again, we want to understand an individual story and how it touches down, how they're viewing it. And so we're asking good questions. Okay, so that's the relational life, the spiritual life, the vocational life. We wouldn't do those all in one session, by the way. Between 2 to 3 sessions, you're working through this. And it's not just going through it as a academic exercise. You're actually seeking to ask reflective questions. The point of, for example, the personal life, as you can look at it now, the sheet where it says life domain personal life, they're prompts to ask you, to get you an opportunity to ask more reflective questions. As an example, in the personal life, so we're really trying to understand how the person sees themselves. How do they understand themselves as an individual? Okay? There's a couple different categories here. One is individuality, personal responsibilities, and their schedule. I'll talk about that in a minute. Their physical health and their mental health. Those are the primary categories of the physical personal life, or the personal life piece. So again, you want to see how does this person understand and perceive themselves, because it really helps you to get to know them. For example, do they see themselves as an introvert or an extrovert? Oh, well, they see themselves as an extrovert. Okay, or maybe let's go the other way. As an introvert, hard introvert. Okay, hard introvert. What does that mean? Give me a definition. How might I see that in your life? Well, I go to work and I'm working amongst a team. It can be really hard. I put a lot of energy into it just so that I can engage well. And then at lunch I'm crashing, and then I go back and I work hard with the team, and then I'm home and I just like to recharge at home. I just like things to be quiet. Okay. Now you're married and you have a little one. When you get home, is it always quiet? What do you want to do there? How you want to navigate that? So understanding how they perceive themselves, and almost like it's inevitable. I'm an introvert, so everybody has to cater to me now. So my home life has to now be reorganized and reoriented around me, instead of learning how to navigate life as one among. But that's important. So where are you most comfortable? Alone, one-on-one, small groups, large groups? Some people like to be in large groups because they can hide. Some people like to be, alone or one-on-one. Well, what does that look like, one-on-one? Where would I see that? You see what I'm saying? I'm bringing up more questions. I'm bringing up thoughts. When you think of spending your time, when you wake up, you've had your coffee, you're alert, and your feet hit the floor, where do you go in your head? Do you immediately think of who am I going to spend time with today? Or do you think of what are the tasks that I have to finish today? We usually default to one or the other. Some blend them, and they say, I want to get things done with people. Okay, well, that's helpful. Because if your tasks are really important, and you're an introvert, and you need to recharge at night, that means you must get certain things done. And if you don't, you're what? A failure. And if you can't recharge, you're frustrated more. Because you see yourself in this introverted sense, and the world must surround my special interests. So how do you, knowing that, gives you the ability to engage them differently in the conversation, to maybe review that, well, while we all have limitations and uniquenesses, how do we work together? Because God's called us to live in community. So how does that work? But if you didn't ask those questions, you really wouldn't know. So it's helpful. The other one, in conflict, what do you typically do? Do you avoid or do you confront? Well, I confront. Okay, well, what does that mean? I would say if I asked you this and polled, how many of you typically avoid or confront? Do you avoid conflict? I see 1, 2, well, the avoiders are avoiding the question. Those that confront? Oh, see, right up. Okay. So there's probably differences in how you would avoid. But there's also nuances in how you confront. Not everybody is just going to confront, like square, bold, who cares, and brashly come into it. Maybe that's how you started, but you learned that, hey, if I want to get anywhere, I can't do that. And you've learned how to confront well, but there's still a tendency, maybe a little tendency to not always do it in a loving manner. But it's important, because if they're having conflict in their marriage and they see themselves as an introvert, and they usually avoid, and they like large groups so they can hide, and they really want to focus on tasks, well, goodness, you've got a whole lot of insight now into some of the things that are personally in their own headspace and how they're framing up what life is looking like and why it must work in the way that they think it should. I'm at my best when I follow or lead. What's interesting is I've had some of these introverted folks say they want to lead, but do you know why? Any ideas why? Because they can control it. They said because they can control the outcome. A lot of students will say, I'm introverted, but I want to lead the study groups or the labs. Why? Because I want to get a good grade. And so I'm going to control that environment. They all hate me, but I don't care because they get a good grade too. Okay, well, interesting. So the main outcome is grades, not necessarily thinking about more than that, right? But it's around control too. So it's very interesting. So when that individual now moves from university and they plummet themselves into a marriage, what is that going to look like? Do they carry those wonderful skills they've learned into that relationship, right? So you need to understand that. By the focus of your words, do you talk more about your failures, your strengths, others' strengths, or others' failures? Where do you go? So you're just getting them to talk about, and they'll often volunteer that one right out of the gate. You never know where they're going to land. What kind of things do you say? And if they're tearing themselves up, they can give you a list. But it gives you insight right into what is that movie that keeps playing repeat in their head. If you didn't have this, you wouldn't necessarily ask this kind of questioning. So I found it helpful. Primary responsibilities in the schedule. One reason why I had this down is because I want to see what they personally think is most important to them without me prompting it from anything more than this assessment. When I talk with them, I want to see, is any of it faith-informed? What actions are they taking? How do they perceive their success or failure in these things? So they're kind of ranking them, or at least giving some sort of scoring. What's important to see is when they're coming for counseling, for example, if their marriage is in struggle and their marriage isn't one of these responsibilities that they see as most important, I'm not shocked by that, but that's often the case. It could be their faith is awry and they're going through deconstruction, or they're contemplating what that is and they're not really sure, but they hear about it. But their walk as a follower, a disciple of Christ, isn't on here. They don't see it as a responsibility. Often people will say, well, I just thought that kind of stuff just happens. I go to church and small group and God just doesn't that just happen? Well, what would be different if you actually made that a priority, a responsibility that you took, and then you thought about how I could pursue that and deepen my faith and grow and serve, and you took ownership to that? Well, that would probably be a little different. Okay. But it's important to see what people will put down as their responsibility. And then also, are they frustrated with it, dissatisfied? It's kind of neutral. Are they satisfied or delighted? You want to see, how do they see that, their perceptions of that. And because you're going to say, well, what are those things that you do or you've tried as you're working through those responsibilities that you see? And you begin to see them either share a lot that they've done or a little, but then that also can correlate to their satisfaction rating with those goals as well. What's even more insightful is if you jump to the next page, and they will already have this filled out, but the idea is saying, give me just your normal ideal week. Just frame up how your week typically goes. And it's very interesting because some people have just very consistent weeks. Others will have brought in like 3 different photocopies of this calendar. And well, one week it's this, one week it's this, and one week it's this. It could be whatever, or it's a mix of everything. Okay, that on its own, the person that has a schedule that's pretty consistent for most of the time, sometimes it might change, versus I'm giving you 3 different versions of what could happen. And I'm not always sure which it's going to be. what typically could be going on in this person's world when they face Monday versus this person facing a Monday? Any ideas? If you have three options that could map out on Monday, then you're not really sure what's going to land. Versus you have a consistency, this is probably what's going to happen Monday. What's going to be the state of mind of this person on Sunday night going into Monday? Or this person's state of mind Sunday going into Monday? Any thoughts? Peace versus anxiety. I don't know what's going on here. The schedule that you have either supports or hinders your future. Think about this, what your priorities are. And you've heard what they've just etched out as responsibilities and how they view their success or failure. Think of it as this example. If it was a marriage an issue, and I've had this, marriage intimacy in the sense of closeness and communication is just broken, and they're feeling themselves growing further and further apart, and they're arguing, and they're frustrated with each other. So by the time I get to this page and I see this schedule, and I'm just looking over it, just anecdotally, and I'm thinking, oh, wait a minute, you guys wake up separately. You guys work separately, and your evenings, well, you might have a 1-hour crossover. What does your schedule show you as most important? Are you willing to make some trade-offs in the extracurricular things that you do at night? Stop doing certain things, because you really probably can't change your work. You're going to work separately more than likely. You might be able to shift how you wake up, but you definitely are going to be able to shape some of your evenings. Do you see that if you reframe this up, it gives you the opportunity to be able to have those conversations, those quiet times of reflection or going for a walk together that you talk about? And you can actually hear and seek to understand each other? It's amazing how many haven't thought about that. And they've created a schedule that really caters to them and the wife's desire and wants, and then his desire and wants, and they haven't really thought of how this actually supports or sabotages their relationship. Again, seeing a schedule like that helps me. I never thought about that for a long time until once I actually was in a marriage situation where exactly what I just described happened, and we're looking at it on a whiteboard and we're just going, how does this support your marriage? They had between a half hour and an hour crossover, which included not going to sleep together at the same time and sometimes in separate rooms. So what if we change some of that? Might that give you a different setup of how well, I don't know, we're so mad at each other. Okay, so now you're afraid to spend time, but you say you want to spend time. So the questions at the bottom, we talk about stress, anxiety, and depressive mood. One of the things I think about is, as you're looking at your schedule and your responsibilities, do any of these things relate to the weight you feel from responsibility on your shoulder, the stress that we feel? You want to see, do they connect the dots? They might say something over here is actually stressing them out, the relationship with their mom or something else. And there's tons of weight because mom's sick and we've got to care for her, and I've got all these other responsibilities and things, but this is what's bugging me. Well, it's important that you know that, because if you're thinking it's directly correlated to what's on the schedule or what's on the responsibilities, but then they're pulling something else out, that's a new factor that you didn't, well, how come it's not on the schedule? Or how come it's not on your responsibilities or what? Anxiety. Anxiety is that intensity of focus or the inability to focus because I'm so anxious and worried about the future. What's going to happen? What ifs? Is any of that related to the fact you've got 3 different schedules that could land and you don't really know? Or is it, or what? Like, what is it correlated to schedule? Is it correlated to your responsibilities? They might say no. Depressive mood, the dullness or the fog that rolls in or the darkness or the hopelessness that we see. Does any of it relate to this? It may not, but you'd want to know if it does. Those are like the big three: stress, anxiety, depressive mood. That's why we put it there. Now what's cool is this last question. You've listed your primary responsibilities and you've shared your typical schedule. Reflect on this question. So they're doing this at home, remember. Do you think you are simply prioritizing what's on your schedule, or are you scheduling your priorities? We all kind of bleed that sometimes. But if certain things are our priorities, they should be properly on our schedule. It's like when you do a budget, you put the fixed expenses on first. So whatever our responsibilities are should be fixed first on our schedule. And then the other things fill in as we can. But do we do that? And is the person in front of you doing that or not? And is their schedule so out of whack that that could be part of the contributing factor to this? So we're trying to understand, how are they being good stewards of what God has entrusted them with? Part of it is their time. Part of it is the skills and training he's given them, because he's got purpose for them to fulfill certain objectives in their life. He's got good works in advance he's prepared for them to do. Have they framed up their life in a way that self-sabotages that or supports that? You're just trying to gain some awareness, if that makes sense. Okay, so any questions at this point? Just looking at the individuality, the primary responsibilities and schedule as you're thinking through this from a counseling perspective. Any questions on any of these two categories in this personal life? So they have limitations on certain individuals for what reasons? They have what, sorry? Okay, so there's some physical challenge, like some mental health, like a mental disability, cognitive disability, or physical disability? Yeah. Sure. So some of this, in that regard, what I'd do, depending on the person, if I knew them, I still might give them this to work with at home and see what they come back with. And then I would talk with them, and I have a whiteboard, nice big whiteboard. So I usually am trying to distill it down, and I might carry the conversation forward a little bit more. Like, how do you think about your schedule? Are you happy with that? Because you're right, you have to see where are people at within their capabilities. I mean, I'm talking to you more deeply than I might drill down in every single nuance with an individual. But yeah, you have to take into consideration the limitations, as well as you have to take into consideration, looking at a person's schedule, you may not be able to change much because you may have committed yourself to certain things, and you're on the hook now for the next 3 months. But having a couple recognize that for the next 3 months, this is going to be really hard. But this is what we're looking to see change because we care and prioritize the relationship. And we're going to work towards that. So in the next 3 months, what can we do to support each other? Well, that's more than they were doing before. And even though this next 3 months are still hard, they realize it's not like signing up for life for this schedule that's just killing us. And they realize in 3 months' time, we can have some things rewritten. And that's helpful for them to see, because it gives them a playing field to play the game of life a little different. It's not a game, but you get what I'm saying. You're navigating life a little differently. So yeah, I hear you. Any other questions? Yep. Mm-hmm. Some people will do it for just an hour. Mm-hmm. Some people say your history intake can take 3 hours because you want to go from childhood all the way to sure. Sure. So does this complement or do you like it on top of? Right. So the way that we've set it up and I'm speaking maybe a lot more through the way ABC would structure their training, because what I'm talking about is a lot what's flowing from that, because I help work with them to kind of reframe some of it. And so the first session, the orientation session, is a full hour, and it's specifically going through the other things that I talked about. So it's walking through what is biblical counseling, it's walking through the counseling agreement, it's thinking about confidentiality, and then it's understanding the main reason why they're there, the support network, the actions they've taken, and hope for their time in counseling. Like that in itself, plus thinking of what can I bring from Scripture to encourage them at that moment. And allows me also to discern, are they in crisis or not? Because if they're in crisis, because we're going to say, what's the pathway forward? So at the end of the session, I'm going to try to share some hope, but then say, this is the pathway forward. Right now, if they're in crisis, I'm going to draw a diagram on the board and talk about crisis a little bit. And I'm going to say, now, where do you see yourself on this? I want them to locate themselves. And if they identify that they're in crisis, like I'm thinking they are, then I can say, okay, well, if we were going to continue from here, we need to navigate this portion and not the next steps that you may think you need to navigate right now. Because right now, there's safety, stability, support that you need. And you need to settle that down over a little bit of period of time so that you can think clearly, that your emotions are stable, that you have the right support around you, so that you can move forward well. If they're not in the crisis, then I'm moving forward and saying, hey, we're going to look at some life areas of your life. We're going to talk the next 2 sessions. We're probably going to talk about your personal life, your spiritual life, your relational life, and your vocational life, which is this. So I would say an orientation session is that, and then I'm talking about the 2 sessions of life domain. So that's how we frame it up. Yeah, it slows it down. And again, it depends. If the person's coming, so again, I guess that also depends on why they're coming. If they're just looking for wisdom, like if it's a wisdom issue, they have to make a decision, you don't need to go through all this. You might get a little bit of a history on certain things, and you're helping them process. But if it's a real life suffering or navigating conflict or a temptation sin issue, you want to be able to see what are the layers of their life and how do they really help give them the layers by which they're filtering life with. And so that's why we slow it down like that. Yeah.
How much of the crisis label is based on their perception versus your perception?
Right. So I guess the key would be I'm listening for the words they're using, the emotions they're using. Can they put thoughts together? Are they scattered? Did they time travel all the time? Like, are they showing signs that they're just where they're at? Because you're only talking about like the main problem, their hopes, and if someone's in those crisis moments, they might be crying at times. They might be like, they might just get quiet. Their body posture. There's a variety of things that you're beginning to pick up on, and even how they're talking about their situation, and again, they're time traveling about the circumstance, and they're scattered, and you're realizing, hey, emotionally, and really in their situation, they're not like beyond this like crisis moment. It's like if you were to think of someone that had an immediate car accident, like a bad car accident, and they're pulled out, and they need to get trauma care at that moment, and then they go to the hospital. They're in ICU or in the trauma ward, and then they're receiving care there, and then they go to maybe a rehab hospital for a period of time, and then they're going home. Okay, we're trying to see, okay, did this person just have a car accident? And they're walking through like as if they're in the rehab hospital. They're not at home yet, where they can navigate life normally. I'm trying to discern by their words, by their emotion, by the story that they're sharing. And they may not have the words to say that they're in crisis. I'm thinking, that's why I don't necessarily say that. What I'll do is I'll draw a diagram that shows how crisis can hit us in life, and then different stages. And I'll say, where do you see yourself? So then I step back and look at that. And then they identify that. When they do, then I can say, okay, then we need to work on these things first. Nope, there shouldn't. It's just the handout. Yeah. Okay, so let's jump into the next one. This is, I love the physical health. The mental health is good too, but I love the physical health one for various reasons. In the Bible, I believe we, as biblical counselors, the Bible is our authority because it's God's word. It's his revelation from outside of us. It gives us truth. It gives us the foundation for living. It helps us to understand really how life is framed up to work. And one of the things that God has told us is that he's created us as a body soul. He's not just created us as a soul with a body, or that we're just physical, but we're a body soul and we'll live that way for eternity. We'll have a new body, which is awesome, glorified body one day. But right now, we have our physical body, and some of us have different limitations with that, and some of us have less than others. But we have to learn how to steward well what God has given to us. And that includes how we care for our body and how we care for our soul. I kind of liken it to fitness of body and soul. It's not just health. Health means void of like disease. But is there a fitness level of our soul? That's where we talk about spiritual disciplines and the training of our souls and development. But is there a fitness of our body as well? Do we care for it? Because those things work together. And so these are some questions, and they're key questions. So the Bible gives us the stewardship of body and soul, and I would say it's important that we also leverage common grace wisdom that we can take from observation, research, and best practices that all fall under God's word. They don't redefine it. They're not equal to it. They fall under it. And if anything contradicts God's word, we don't accept it. So, for example, the first question, how would you rate your overall health? I want to get, again, their perception. Do they have sober awareness of this? I wrote down. Do they have sober awareness of their health? Is it congruent with the rest of what they're going to share? And it's kind of I'm trying to ask the same question different ways to see do they connect the dots here or not? So they might say, oh, they have good health. So take the perception of good health. Now let's go through this. How physically active are you weekly? Well, I have light to no activity. Okay. So generally speaking, why would that be a problem? Well, the World Health Organization has identified one of the greatest threats to health is the lack of activity. I'm not talking about going to the gym. I'm saying physical activity of some sort. 80% of the population does not get enough activity in Canada to prevent chronic disease. Just think about that. 80% of the population doesn't get enough activity of some form to prevent chronic disease. It means you're susceptible right out of the gate. So does that not affect how you think and how you feel? If your body's out of whack? It sure does. But if they say they have light or no activity, but they say they have good health, okay, all I'm saying is you're going, okay, so you think you have good health. What does that tell you? That says that something's off there. How they're viewing this, it either doesn't matter, or maybe they were very active, and now they're not because something happened. So not just assuming, you want to follow up with that. Has that always been the case? Over the past 6 months, has it always been like that? Oh, no, this changed. Oh, when did it change? When this circumstance happened. Oh, interesting. So there's a correlation there. That means if I could get you maybe a little bit more active, that may help you physically, and you might be in a better spot to navigate things when I'm talking to you in your soul. I'm gathering data. I'm just thinking. No, I'm thinking with you here, and I'm trying to understand where they're at. I'm going a little further. I don't go into all these deep dives, but I'm not there for the next session, so I can't get into all of it. So then the other one is here. How many hours of daily sleep have you received recently? 1 to 2, 3 to 4, 5 to 6, 7 to 8, 8 plus. Why again would I care? Have you ever tried to go and function well without 2 or 3 days of solid sleep? How's that go for you on the third day? How about if that's been chronic over the past 4 weeks? Or it's up and down haphazardly over the past 3 months? It's going to radically affect you. If I care about you, and I care about the bigger view that God's created you as a body soul, how can I help you learn how to have good body stewardship? How can we think through what are those implications that are getting you around sleep? And there could be some basic recommendations, but I also might say you need to go talk to your doctor. There could be a variety of different solutions that we could do, but I also can help to encourage if I understand a little bit about sleep. Do you realize that 20% of the population in Canada is sleep deprived? 1 in 7 people in Canada suffer from insomnia. Sleep is a highly active metabolic process that helps optimize our brain structure, repair damaged cells in the body, and restores our energy. That's what sleep does. It's very active. It's not passive. So if we're not sleeping well, those things are impacted. Our cells restoring, our energy levels, the brain structure, all that stuff. It's like our brains have these open filing cabinets and all these files are here. And when you go to sleep, the brain is taking all these files and putting them in the filing cabinets and reordering them all so that everything is ordered well. Well, if your sleep's all over the place, the files aren't getting properly in there, and you got a messy office, and that ain't going so well if it's day after day, week after week. So again, all I'm thinking of, you're coming in here for this main reason. And I'm just looking at you from the personal side. How does how you see yourself, how does your schedule and responsibilities, how does your physical side of things affect this potentially? Where is the potential correlation? Do I even have a place for that? Do you drink a couple glasses of water each day? Want to make sure there's hydration going on? What best describes your weekly nutritional intake? Is it fast food, box food, to fresh organic food? I just use that as a scale, just trying to see where people are at. How are you eating? What's your diet? Again, why? Because I used to be there. 2018, 2017, I was 300 pounds and was painfully trying to tie my shoes. And in pastoral ministry, challenging you to be disciplined in your faith. And I didn't give a rip about my body and how I stewarded it. How in the world do we have credibility? It smacked me in the face. And it doesn't mean everything's perfect. COVID really was a punch in my face to figure out how I was going to learn how to navigate that body stewardship, I can tell you. Because what I had in place that helped me to lose the 100 pounds wasn't there during COVID, and I had to rethink. In any case, you realize this. In the 80s, 20% of Canada's population was obese. Okay? Now, 58%. That's a big deal. One of the things, there's a lot of reasons that you could say. One of the things is our jobs have changed. We went from agrarian to industrialized to now it's knowledge-based. So where do we spend all our time? At the computer, at a desk, on a Zoom call. So what does that affect? That probably affects my sleep. Why? Because I got bright lights smacking me in the face all the time. What does that also affect? My activity level. Funny thing. So why do we have to create activity? Because our workspaces used to be physically active and now they're not. So if we want to have this job, I have to also do this. And I also have to learn how to sleep and take note of when do I shut my screens off? When do I turn them on? I have to learn how to do that. I never thought I would have to do that. Is that being a good steward of what God has entrusted me with? Yeah. Because if I don't have my headspace and the right emotional balance because I'm all wound up, then when I talk to you, I'm going to snap your face off. Well, that's not being very Christian, is it? It's learning how to steward body and soul. So part of it, at the front end, I'm trying to see what are those quick wins we can get at the beginning so that when we take the longer periods of time to talk through other aspects of our soul, which we're going to spend a lot more time on, we can do that well, but I don't have to worry about the self-sabotage. You also get to see some wins. Imagine if all of a sudden you're sleeping a little better. Woohoo! You know, or you made some 1% changes on the diet, 1% changes on the activity, not like rewriting the whole script. You're getting some wins. Now we can talk about, okay, now this soul struggle. Oh, but I've had you had a struggle with sleep too, didn't you? But look, God helped you there. He can help you here. See, there's a strategy kind of involved there. Chronic health conditions. Are you taking prescription meds? It's just helpful to get, I mean, again, I don't deep dive into all these things. It all depends on where they're at and what they're saying, but it's helpful because you can launch off of it. There's a rationale that's there. Okay, on the next page, do you drink alcoholic beverages? Do you drink coffee, caffeinated drinks, tobacco? Again, it's just, what is their patterns? I want to understand what's going on in their world, that's all. They may be, they don't drink coffee, but they drink energy drinks all over the place. And they're wondering why they can't sleep, you know, and whatever else. It's helpful to know. Okay, moving into the mental health piece. Do you have a cell phone? It's probably a yes. If yes, what do you use it for? I just want to hear what they have to say. Next question. How much time do you spend on screens? If you don't know, I tell you how to get there on your iPhone so you can actually tell. Now, why is that important? Again, here's an article from CBC News. Smartphones are harming Canadians' mental health. Canadians are addicted to their smartphones, and it's undermining their mental health and productivity. If you drink a bottle of wine before bed every night, slept with a bottle of wine within 10 feet of your head while sleeping, and drank a bottle of wine when you got up in the morning, we would call you an alcoholic. We are all doing that with our cell phones, and we don't seem to see ourselves as phoneaholics. One author that's written a book called Bad Therapy, Abigail Shrier, she said this about when she was assessing this whole thing with cell phones. Tic disorders, gender dysphoria, anorexia, dissociative identity disorder, trichotillomania, which is like self-harm through hair pulling, cutting, the parade of the horribles induced by smartphones could fill a psychiatric manual on its own. If smartphones were a boy who wanted to see your daughter a generation ago, parents would have taken one look at him and said, "No way am I letting that kid in my door." The smartphone and the rise of social media offer a compelling candidate for an environmental cause of poor adolescent mental health. It's important to see, again, what are the patterns and behaviors and what are going on? What is the person? Why are they here? Why are they saying they're struggling? They're saying they're coming for anxiety or conflict or, I don't know, some temptation that's bothering them. Okay, you're seeing how do they see themselves? You're seeing how is their schedule set up? What are their responsibilities? How do they view that? Maybe they're trying to escape from those responsibilities by using this temptation actually helps them to run and hide from a responsibility, maybe. As you then jump into the physical health, well, how do they navigate their physical health? Do they even see that they have to care for themselves before the Lord? Could there be something, how again does that correlate? Maybe. How does this aspect of phone use or tablet use affect them? Because it does. So that's important because now that rolls into, over the past couple weeks, describe what your thoughts have been dwelling on. Where does your mind go? I want to hear what they've been thinking about. Just tell me, over the past 2 weeks, where have your thoughts really been focused? What have you been dwelling on? What's replaying? Tell me the narrative. The other thing is, what picture best represents what you feel on the inside? Tell me a picture. What picture best represents how you're feeling on the inside right now? Gives them an opportunity to say a variety of different things. It could be a black hole. It could be like I'm being chased by a bull. It could be, I don't know. There's a range of questions that people, or pictures that people will give to answer that. But what's helpful is you're moving from just like a cognitive piece of trying to get them to frame up their thoughts, but you're also now trying to get them to be creative and illustrate that picture that's inside and get it out so I can see. That's helpful. When you consider your actions lately, how have you been choosing to respond to those circumstances? Again, these are just questions. Again, I may not go deep into all these. I might not ask all these questions. It all depends on how the session goes. And again, I'm not using this as a means of deep diving. It's data gathering. It's understanding. And I ask reflective questions. I'll make a note on the margin. I need to talk to them about this. I need to talk to them about this. At the end, we might say, hey, as we're going forward, here's one thing that I think might be really helpful out of all of this. And I might pick one of them. Maybe it's the schedule. Maybe it's the nutrition. Maybe it's the sleep. Something that they can physically nudge 1% better. But look at it from the architecture of stewardship under God's grace. How do they live their lives? And all areas of their life is submitted into his hands, including how they care for themselves. Last page, have you ever had a severe emotional upset? It's good to see if they put anything down. Have you ever seen a counselor, psychologist, or psychiatrist? I always have that in at the end. And sometimes they'll say yes or no or whatever there. Why would that be important to know that? The last question, have they ever seen someone?
I think sometimes, like usually if you know if they saw a counselor before,
Yep.
or a psychiatrist, you ask them what happened there.
Right.
And sometimes it gives you a heads up
Yes.
for a repeat.
Right. Exactly. So what you're suggesting is it's helpful to see what's gone well, what's not gone so well, what might be repeated, and how they see this. It really gives you a framework, because they had certain things that they either learned to trust or distrust in those experiences. They had certain hopes that were either realized or not realized, for various reasons. I'm not saying that it's all justified. There are expectations that they may have had of the counselor that aren't now. So it really helps you to understand. Again, thinking of in the business world, when you go in and you're talking about solutions for them, you'd want to ask the client, what hasn't worked well? What was your experience like with the last vendor? Oh, I love those, because they tell you, all that kind of goods and bads on it. Okay, great. We're gonna now make sure we help provide all the answers to those bad things with our supply. Okay, but it's helpful to understand when we're coming in and working with people, where are they at? All these things layer together. Now imagine you take the time to, in some way, touch down on some of these questions about the personal life. And then you touch down on the relational life that goes through friendship and family and marriage or dating and looks at children. And then you look at the spiritual life, their experiences with church, how they view, what do they believe on certain things, just general. I mean, we're not talking deep theological thought. We're just asking some nice questions to help you to really get a landing page on their vocational life. Do they actually see that their education matches what they're doing? Are they frustrated with that? Do they want to, how do they view God's providential care and walking with them? If you take the time to walk, will you know more about them after doing that than you did just going in? Than just asking a few questions. Tell me about your personal life. Tell me about your relational life. Tell me about your vocational life. Tell me about what you believe spiritually. If those were the questions that I asked, I would probably get a little script, a little bit of info, but I wouldn't have this kind of info. Again, not everything here would I ask in depth, because I can skip over things, because I should have this in advance back to me, right? They filled it in. But man, it gets back to what I was saying. They're a person to be loved, not a project to be fixed. And I want to walk slow enough and quick enough at the right pace that's walking with them. I'm not trying to pigeonhole them into my system. So sometimes we go slow through some of these things. Some of them we go faster because it's actually starting to hit where they're at. And I might be thinking, man, I thought I was going to be dealing with some other issues. And I'm talking about some of these issues first. But that's where they're at. That's what resonates. That's what's important. That's what God has them here for that moment. Most of all, I think it's great when you can hear them and they know they've been heard. And you're connecting them with the Lord. Because through it all you're praying. And you're helping them to understand that it's not just you that's hearing them, but also God is hearing them. And how can they craft a prayer to the Lord about some of these areas that they need to either strengthen or be thankful for, just in how they care and steward their life. Imagine. That's a win. They're starting to see God in this personal area. We've just touched on this one area. To me, it's exciting because then we can get it more in depth into walking through the various layers of suffering and getting through the gospel connection and talking about the heart. But again, if I have this history, the themes and patterns that I can begin to connect from work to personal life to relational life, all of a sudden lift when we start to talk about the gospel, when we start to talk about the heart interaction of what they're thinking and feeling and what they're choosing to do and why this is happening in their life. All of a sudden, I have this information just starts to lift off the page when we're talking about those other areas that we really want to get to. So, any questions on those areas, the physical health, the mental health areas? It's all of this. So the personal life is, personal life is the individuality, the responsibilities, the physical health and mental health. Yeah. Yeah, I gave them a lot of what I had, and then they revamped some of it, but yeah, 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 yeah. So we use that, and I keep developing this too. So this was like last year or the year before that I think they took this information from me, and then but we keep evolving it like within our training center. So we just keep adapting it when we're learning, hey, this should be added, like the smartphone piece. We didn't have that in there. It was like, why aren't we asking this? Because it's not just kids. It's everyone that's using this crazy thing that's stuck in our hands. So what's the orientation session? So the orientation session is that very first time that you're meeting with someone that goes over, what is biblical counseling, the counseling agreement, the confidentiality, and then those questions. Why are you here? What's your support look like in that situation? What have you taken for action? And the hopes. So the personal life and the relational and all that builds off of that first session that we've had, if they're not in crisis. Yeah. No, I give them two. I would give them the personal life and the relational life and say, take your time to work through this, fill it out. And by the way, don't write paragraphs. I just want some thoughts as you're going because we're going to talk about it together. So then, because some people got into it and they were like, whoa, it took me forever. I was like, how does it take you forever? You just got to fill in some questions because they overthink it, right? But that's helpful to know. You give them something, they're going to overthink it and they have to get it perfect. Well, why is that important? Well, how does that affect why you're coming to seek counseling? There's a lot of correlations there. So just two at a time, and then we work through it as we can. If we can get through it quickly, we do. If we have to go slower, we do. It's not really about speed because all of this really is being able to help think through how do we reframe up their whole life from a biblical worldview, whether it's any of these initial life domains or the other aspects. Any other questions? Yep. Yep.
So I'm trying to kind of figure it out. Okay, so like a lot of the questions that we would ask in the history we take
Yep.
is more like past questions. I really like this though. I thought
Yep.
but it's like, okay, from age, 1 to 5, how was your relationship with your mom and your dad?
Right.
Like when you think about you at school,
Right.
it goes through the whole thing. But a lot of it is past.
Yep.
Do you, like your way, you don't do that? It's just
No, nope. So like in the relational life one, the relational one, it goes through like how do they view friendship, and then it'll talk about what was your experiences growing up, what was your experiences like now as a young adult or whatever with friendship, a little bit. In the family piece, it'll go through mother and father and talking. And tell me what was your relationship like with your father, growing up versus now. Is it different? It asks some questions in there with mom and that too, and they fill in some basics there. Again, you can go as quickly or slowly through all of that. It all depends on what they're sharing, and also sometimes they don't share a lot, and that's also a sign that something is there because they don't say much. It's kind of like, yeah, things weren't so good. Now we're fine. Next, you're like, wait a minute. So you slow it down. So yeah, that is in there, but it's kind of like I want to see the whole picture of the person. We don't, it's just the past. It's like why I'm looking at the present too. Yeah, good.
I like your outline and like I love to read it. I've been using like that. It's a diagram, the soil your heart is formed in, and all the aspects like your education, your family,
Yeah,
culture,
sure.
media, and how it influences your thoughts, beliefs,
Yeah.
desires, and fears.
Yep.
And I like this too because
It complements that.
like you said, that lady said that was, I was digging more into their story from the past.
Yep.
But then, yeah, this is perfect to bring
Yep.
into the present.
Yeah, so the other ones will etch out some of the past history, and the personal life, which we do, we start with the present. And there's a kind of a rationale there too, because it's probably the most easy for them to talk about and put together. So if we can have a good conversation, again, I'm thinking of accumulating wins. I'm talking wins, but I'm thinking as a counselor, can I have a win with you, building rapport? Well, if I can talk about the personal life, hopefully that's something that's the easiest thing for you to talk about with me. And then we can go into relational life. Because we've talked about this, now let's go back. And they go, oh, okay, as we've learned how to talk about, okay, now I have a little bit of a less fear of opening up to you about these things. And then we can go on through the others. That's why the spiritual isn't the first. Because I want to have two sessions, I want to talk about some things with you first and have rapport. So you're not telling me what you think I want to hear, but you realize I'm not actually going to be judging you here and coming at you like a Mack truck. I want you to tell me what's truly in your thoughts and beliefs about God, about this. So I always move that to the second or third session, the spiritual life one, because I want to leverage rapport building with you first, because I find that people can sometimes give you what they think you want to hear versus what they actually believe, and that throws everything off. Because you don't know them why something isn't fitting here. Like when you're seeing the story and you're trying to put pieces together, it doesn't make sense.
They come in for counseling, get their lives all together.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, my spiritual life is great, but then what's going on here? Anyway, any other questions? Yeah, so for example, we've customized these life domains for children, teens, and adults. So and also because we run an enrichment track, not just the certification track. So for those that were just doing more of like mentoring, so I'll take like the categories here and I'll ask just questions, some shorter questions that will still touch on some of these areas, but are much easier to respond. So whether it's blending sort of the children and teen so that it's not as complicated, but still gets you into some of their understanding of things, that can be helpful. So yeah, we try to scale we've just developed that. Oh, with the pastor. Oh, sorry, with the pastor in that. So going through this? No, I wouldn't. Yeah. Oftentimes they're like, "Whoa, I haven't even thought about like these categories in my life." Like they're usually in one area that's really strong, and that's where they put all their eggs and their time and energy. And when they can slow down enough and go, and they begin to look at some of these areas, I mean, they go, wow, I've spent time in just these 2 sessions, and I've taken a broad sweep through, like really looking at myself in a biblical way. I've never done that before, and this exercise in itself was helpful, just to begin to see their life from within that what's congruent and what's not. Yeah, but we also do the other. Sorry, I missed what you were saying. Yeah. Any other questions? Well, I appreciate you taking the time. This is a big thing on me. I know when Curtis asked me, what would you like to speak on? What do you think is some of the biggest misses? For me, this is the biggest misses. We rush and truncate the quality of the data gathering and the understanding. I've experienced it like I've been counseling now for 14, 15 years. And at the beginning, I would never have approached it like this. It would have been much faster, and I would have touched down on a few areas, and then I'm off to hitting this is what you need to do, and get going kind of a thing. And just seeing how can we slow things down to discern well, know the person, that they realize they're not a project here for you that you're trying to fix, but a person to be loved. And then they see God in the midst of all that. Wow. Again, thinking through that scripture, I cry out to God, the Most High God, who fulfills his purposes for me. That was David in the midst of the cave where Saul is sitting in front of him, and he's under crisis, and yet he could still see that situation and realize that wasn't the end of the story because he had a faith-informed perspective. We want to get to a place with folks that they're able to walk through life, not fear suffering or challenge or temptation, but have the wisdom and the faith in God and learning how to take refuge in him, that they have the skill and ability to do that well. Because they are going to still face those times. We want this kind of a response that David gave. We need those kinds of responses. And I think as we walk with people well, it cultivates the right kind of faith-informed perspective to navigate life with. So thank you for taking the time.